Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon, or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode. Well, podcast fans, tonight we have a double treat. Dan Baldwin and George Sewell will discuss pendulum dowsing and how it can be used to contact the dearly departed, including the spirits of the Southwest. If any of you are fans of Netflix's Haunted series, Season 1, Episode 5 was an abduction case with Lindsay Higgins, and George and Dan have worked extensively with Lindsay to kind of pull out her story and some other interesting findings, and we'll talk about that in tonight's show. And in fact, George was the one on Haunted. There's usually the experiencer and some friends or colleagues. George was on that panel on that episode, Season 1, Episode 5 of Haunted. But let me give you a very quick bio of each of them. Dan Baldwin first. Dan's a professional writer, often a ghost writer, no pun intended, for other professionals. He has written and co-written or ghosted more than 60 books, and he's won numerous local, regional, and national awards. Dan's a certified clinical hypnotherapist, plays the Native American flute, and is an expert pendulum dowser, having used the pendulum to assist in finding missing persons for over 20 years. George Sewell describes himself as a cognitive philanthropist. He has a lifelong interest in study of the paranormal and the UFO phenomenon. He is the author of Habits, Patterns, and Thoughts That Go Bump in the Night, A Gnome, A Candle, and Me, Just the FAQs, Please, about alcohol and drug abuse, co-author Dan Baldwin, and the novels The Krismere and A Turn at the Point. As a playwright, George has written for community theater, college theater, and dinner theaters, for which he was awarded the Louisiana Division of the Arts Fellowship in Theater Playwriting. And, my friends, with that as an intro, it's time to raise the curtains and begin the show.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing. Nothing.
Oh, this is an episode I've been waiting for, loyal listeners. Tonight, we have Dan Baldwin and George Sewell. And they have many skills, but they complement each other quite well. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Dan and George. Dan, we'll start with you first. I imagine if you're at a cocktail party and someone says, "What do you do?" It's like a Pandora's box of interesting things. How would you introduce yourself for someone that doesn't know who you are?
Normally, I'm a pretty shy person, but I would, if they were serious, I would say, "How long do you have?"
45 to 60 minutes, Dan. Okay.
Short version, I am a full-time writer. I write fiction, and I'm an award-winning writer, by the way. I write fiction in multiple genres. I do ghostwriting for other people, and I do paranormal nonfiction, which includes ghost, UFOs, you name it.
And one of your supreme skills, which is we're going to go into after we introduce George, is pendulum dowsing, which I have very little experience with. I did do it once in a haunted house. I live about a mile from one of the most haunted houses in the United States. It's called the S.K. Pierce Victorian Mansion. And so I took a dowsing and pendulum class one night there, and it was kind of interesting.
Oh, good. That's a good topic.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. And George, same thing. I saw in your bio you're a cognitive philanthropist. What does that mean, and how would you explain that?
That's kind of the flippant way I describe my life after retirement, which is I strive to help people think. I mean, seriously think.
Think about what? Just think about their awareness and their consciousness. It's almost like you think of Robin Williams. You ever see like the Dead Poet Society where he makes them get up on top of the table and look at it from a different perspective? How would you make people think?
It's a flippant phrase, and the philanthropist is just me describing that I'm happy to do this free of charge. It's not really anything profound.
Oh, okay. How did you and Dan meet?
George's fault.
George, it's up to you.
Okay. Back in the mid-'70s, both Dan and I were living in Shreveport, Louisiana. I still live across the river in Bossier City. And one of the things that I was doing kind of on the side was I was doing the arts and entertainment reporting for a weekly magazine in Shreveport. And at that same time, Dan was also spending some time with that same publication with some of their features. And the editor, Ed Gage, grabbed me one day and said, "George, you need to meet this Dan Baldwin fellow. I think you two would get along." And he said roughly the same thing to Dan. So we said, "Hey, how you doing?" "Okay, get a beer?" "Fine." Went and got a beer, and we've been making mischief ever since.
That's amazing. Talk about just a few of the books you guys have been working on. And we're going to talk about at the end of this episode your latest endeavor, which is really fascinating. It's about sky people or star people. But talk about some of the ones that you've done about pendulums, and then we're going to go into the Lindsay Higgins amazing case.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in with the pendulums. I've been doing pendulum dowsing for about almost a quarter of a century. I got involved with it as a psychic tool to find missing children. And I still do a little bit of that, and I was intensely involved with that for quite a while. And I got involved in not only missing person and doing criminal cases, but also got into checking out the departed, the spirit world. And I've written a number of books on the subject. And one of the latest I wrote was something called the Paranormal Pendulum. And it was simply a how-to book on using pendulum dowsing to contact, mom, dad, grandpa, Davy Crockett, Cleopatra,
Wow.
The spirit world,
Yeah.
And in researching that book, I spent a lot of time over with George. He was a brilliant researcher. And after I finished the Paranormal Pendulum, I realized I had all this information about orbs crossing over into the white light, what it's like on the other side, reincarnation. Can spirits come back? Are spirits trapped? Is there such a thing as a haunted house? All of that. And so I put that together and turned out a rather substantial book on the afterlife. And we call that Paranormal Pendulum 2. And then one night I got a call from George and boiling everything down. He said, "Hey, Dan, do you think we can use the pendulum dowsing to investigate UFOs? I've run into this lady named Lindsay Higgins, and she's got a terrific story. Do you think we can do that?" And I said, "Well, I can be there in 24 hours.
Wow. Hey,
rock on a string.
that's what I was going to clarify for the listeners. And one of my questions was, do you need a certain crystal or stone? And I think you have an answer for that.
Oh, no, it's the pendulum is merely a weight on a string. And the weight can be rock, wood, plastic. I used a woman's necklace one time in a rather intense spirit release. It's a tool. There's nothing mystical or magical or anything about a pendulum. The so-called magic occurs between your subconscious mind and what's out there.
You know, when I only took one class, but I loved it. It was great. I actually felt I could do it. I almost felt like it was something that I could do because,
You can.
yeah, because when I did it, it was like, what's yes, what's no, and maybe. And those are the three that I did. But I was asking questions about myself. I mean, I wasn't really asking questions outside of myself. Do you need to ask permission before you do that? Or how does that work when you ask questions
No,
beyond yourself?
no, not at all. The real trick, I mean, if you can hold a rock on a string, you can do pendulum dowsing. The only real challenge to it is keeping your mind totally clear so that your subconscious mind does the work rather than your critical mind.
Yeah.
And yeah, one of the benefits, yeah, that George and I have run into with the pendulum dowsing and contact in the spirit world is that you're not limited to contact that's maybe one EVP or a knock on the wood or a certain feeling or the hair on your arm raises up.
Yeah.
Using pendulum dowsing, you can have extended conversations, and I mean literal conversations with those on the other side. George and I have talked with people on the other side for 10, 15, 20 minutes.
Wow. It's interesting. You talked about you started with this, and George, we'll get back to you and Lindsay Higgins in a minute. But Dan, you talked about this in terms of finding missing people. It almost seems like they'd use remote viewers or someone like that would be more expedited. But how many questions would it take you to kind of get an answer to locate someone that was missing?
Well, one, I've done remote viewing, and there's a lot to that. I'm better at pendulum dowsing, and it is time consuming because you have to ask yes or no questions. There's no doubt about it. It takes a long time. But one of the benefits, especially in looking for missing persons, I can get down to latitude and longitude or street addresses. You just have to ask a lot of questions.
Wow, that's amazing. And George, I know in your experience, you've done a lot of things. I know you're retired now, but really, in your introduction, which I've recorded before this, you've done a lot of great stuff. You also were part of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, for a while, at a pretty high position in Louisiana. I've had a lot of guests on this show from MUFON, and I would imagine your experiences with MUFON kind of shaped how you do investigations and the questions you need to ask, and had relevance with Lindsay Higgins' case. Is that accurate?
Not exactly. I was a trained counselor, and I was very, very comfortable and capable interviewing people, and that just kind of was a plus for any work I did with MUFON. And my main activities with MUFON is for, I think it's three years in the early 1990s. I was asked to be the assistant to the state director for MUFON. So that was about the only official capacity I had with MUFON. But it was a very productive several years. Because of that association, I was able to let it be known that, hey, you got a MUFON person here in Shreveport. And a lot of folks took advantage of that to contact me, to have an honest ear to listen to what they had experienced. They weren't looking for necessarily solutions or even explanations. They just wanted somebody they could talk. And that was my history as a counselor. I'm used to listening to people in confidence.
Well, you should be a podcaster. That would be good too. So, and George, how was the activity back when you were in MUFON? Was it as active as it is now, or how was it back then? Which is only a couple decades ago.
I can only speak for my area, Northwest Louisiana, which has always been pretty active. I've talked to a lot of people who've been kind of up on this subject for many, many decades, and they're reporting that the activity around Shreveport in this part of Louisiana goes back generation. In fact, Dan and I investigated a couple of times a location that we call Weldon Hill, which is not terribly far from this area, but it's out in the country. And this was a homestead that had active interaction between at least 3 generations of the same family stretching back to the late 1900s. And that was an eye-opener as far as whatever the attraction is for these lights or these craft, it's not fleeting. Either there's something geographically that they're interested in, or it could be a specific family that is of interest. It could be some sort of geologic aspect, but there's something there that would produce that kind of continuity, and that was something I hadn't really bumped into.
You know, it's funny. I think of Louisiana. I think of more of hauntings and ghosts and things like that. You
We
know,
got that too.
yeah. Which I do want to. I do want to. I'd be remiss if I didn't get your gentleman's thoughts and beliefs on a couple broad things before we go into the Lindsay Higgins case. When it comes to the afterlife, aliens, and abductions, Dan, I'll start with you first, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
What is your belief in the afterlife? Do you believe in reincarnation, or do you believe in just one life? Aliens, and this will be a slightly long question. I apologize, but
Yeah.
aliens, do they have consciousness? Do they have a soul? Do they have an afterlife? And abductions, which I'm going to guess you believe in. So just kind of on those things, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, in terms of aliens and spirits, in fact, you'll want to get in a little bit with this to George, but putting our book together, we're doing a UFO book guided by a spirit from the other side.
Well, that's great.
There's a chapter in the books, the abduction, Paranormal Pendulum 3, called The Stage Manager, and this is a spirit of a woman who was a prominent actress in the 19th century, and she was pulling strings and not manipulating. I don't mean it in that frame, but she was nudging George and me and Lindsay along so that at some point the three of us would meet. And I think the purpose of that was to get her story out to other people.
Mm.
So in terms of reincarnation, the evidence that we get is that there definitely is reincarnation. The one thing that I found surprising, however, was that it's not mandatory. In other words, it's a choice.
Huh.
You can, you get up there and you do have a life review. It's not like a trial. You're not put on trial, but you meet with for lack of a better term, a committee, and you go over your life and what did I learn? What do I need to learn? And you decide, well, I need to go back and learn how to be a better person, or I need to experience being a victim, or I need to experience being a hero, or a woman, or a man, or whatever. And you can reincarnate and come back and get that lesson. But it's a matter of choice.
Okay, that's great. I've heard that before. Before we go to George, quick question. Cleopatra, say if I wanted to go back and talk to Cleopatra, well, she's reincarnated many times since then. She could have been my mother, Carlotta Maria Suarez, or me. So a person that's had multiple past lives, are those entities still available to speak to via dowsing, or do they just move on to who they were after, who they evolve, who they reincarnate after that? Is there an imprint that stays behind, I guess?
Oh, I don't like the term residual, but to me, the soul is like a multifaceted gem.
Mm-hmm.
There's one major soul, but there are also different facets of it. And you can contact, again, through pendulum dowsing, you can contact the different facets.
Interesting. Great. Thank you so much. That's awesome. George, on to you. I mean, I also want to hear about your beliefs on ghosts as well. The afterlife, aliens, and abductions, similar belief to Dan, or do you take a left where he takes a right anywhere?
No, it's very, very similar. I've been interested in this whole arena my entire life, so I've looked at it from just every possible angle and have studied it intensely, and it feels right. Okay. The continuity of life is paramount. And I think if more people were aware of that, our society would be a much more pleasant place to live. We did encounter in the research with Lindsay very definite instances of reincarnation. In fact, Lindsay, her sister, and her father were together in those same roles towards the end of the 19th century, living here in Shreveport. In fact, we've gone out to the graveyards to visit their graves and tombstones from that particular lifetime. Sally Murph Woodworth was Lindsay Higgins in that previous incarnation. Her father was W.D. Woodworth. So for whatever reason, that group, they reincarnated relatively quickly.
Yeah.
To maintain that same family structure for reasons, well, that they certainly agreed on. And I think that's probably more the case than not. I do believe that there are, I would say, cohorts of souls that tend to stick together. They like each other. They like to play with each other. They have similar spiritual evolution, and they very likely incarnate as a group or a large part of the group. Life's very fun. It's very busy.
What are your thoughts on how it all starts and how it all ends? Not like one life, but like would you call it a spirit, a soul? What would you call this entity that reincarnates?
I would use the term soul, which is a spirit. It's that living essence of everything, that little fragment of what we would call God that has been individualized or personalized, that I experience as me, and Dan as Dan, and you as you, and so on down the line.
And I thought I heard you on a podcast talk about spirits. I've had people say there are spirits and there are ghosts. Spirits can cross the plane, between the afterlife and visit us here on Earth. And then there are ghosts that are kind of earthbound and locked into the house or wherever they may be for whatever reasons. What are your thoughts on that?
I would draw an analogy with just regular people. You've got people who are happy and they'd like to stay together. You got people who are miserable and they're no fun to be around, and they seek out their miserable company. That's just part of it, part of life.
Yeah, let me jump in here real quick on that. I don't see a difference between ghost and spirit. I mean, the spirit is here, or whatever form you want to call it. There are spirits who are trapped here, but they are self-trapped because they're afraid to cross over. From my experience, the ones that I've interviewed, they're afraid of some terrible retribution that will happen to them on the other side. And that's why they're here. When you release one of those spirits, it is quite the emotional experience. On the other hand, I think a lot of the ghosts that people encounter who think are haunting a house, they're just traveling back. They have the ability to come here anytime they want to. And I think the reason you go to a haunted house and you encounter a ghost, well, you encounter the ghost because they came down to where you are and you just happen to be in the haunted house.
Mm.
If you were in your kitchen, they would come down to your kitchen. They're not trapped in the haunted house.
You don't believe in portals then? Yeah, because like the house right, down the road from me is supposed to have a couple portals, right? So you don't think there's portals. They can come and go as they please anywhere. Is that
there
accurate?
are portals, obviously, but the spirits can come and go pretty much as they want to. We encounter several. We ask them, why do you keep coming back here? And the answer is, well, I like it here. The spirit can come back and enjoy a very happy moment in his physical life and relive that as many times as he wants.
Excellent, thanks. I've had over 100 episodes, right? Talked to numerous peoples, and I always have more questions than fewer because I get all these different frames of reference. There's continuity several times as well, so it always is enlightening for me to hear people that are credible, and almost everyone is, and you two certainly are, to help formulate in my mind what's going to go on. Because I started this a while ago when my mother was ready to pass, and I made a documentary, and then when COVID hit, I started the podcast because I figured I'd be home alone for a while and I need to talk to people. So I never had that sixth eye or wasn't able to pick up things. I was more of a tunnel vision guy, and it's really helped me talking to people like you gentlemen to help raise my awareness, so it's very helpful for me. So I'd like to get into Lindsay Higgins because this is an amazing, it's like a case study as well, I think, for your pendulum dowsing, Dan. So George, can you tell us how that kicked off and how I guess was it this Kate Bateman, was it this entity that kind of brought you guys together? Or?
Now that we understand more of how it all occurred, yes, Kate Bateman is back there as the stage manager. She's putting the idea into Lindsay that Lindsay reports having encounters with alien beings and other type visitations all her life. Very few people were aware of it. I mean, who are you going to talk to, really? And she reached the point in her life, she was in her 40s, that just can't keep sitting on this. It's just, she's got to tell it. She's got to get it out. She's got to let it go. I think that was Kate kind of nudging her. And Lindsay had a friend whom I was acquainted, and the friend was aware of my interest in MUFON and the spirit world and UFOs and all that kind of good stuff. So the friend suggested, Lindsay, why don't you give George a call? One night the phone rang. I didn't recognize it, but had a sense I better pick up this call. And it was Lindsay, and we spent the next 2 hours, me listening to her telling her story, beginning when she was about 3 years old, when that's her first actual memory of some sort of spirit encounter, and coming up to the present day and her decision to come out with it. And then subsequently that led to her getting involved with a Los Angeles production company for the Netflix series, and kind of rocking and rolling from there.
Did Dan get involved with you and Lindsay before the Netflix series or afterwards?
Before. I've been working with Dan on the Pendulum work, the previous books, Pendulum 1 and 2, Dowsing the Departed and whatnot. So I was intrigued with the effectiveness of the pendulum dowsing as an investigative tool. And I was unaware of that tool ever having been in the arsenal of investigators into any of the UFO phenomenon or abduction scenarios or whatnot. And that just popped. Okay, Dan, let me tell you about Lindsay. She's willing to work with us. She wants to know what the heck is going on. And I think the pendulum is going to be the tool to use. And that turned out to be the case.
And did Dan live by you, or was this a phone call or a Zoom call where he did it remotely, or is it in person?
Yeah. Here's a perfect example of Kate's nudging. When I started working on my research for the paranormal pendulum books, I live out here in Arizona. I can drive down to Tombstone, spend the weekend in Tombstone, and have enough ghost stories for 2 or 3 books. But when I started working on this book, it never occurred to me to go any place other than to Louisiana and work with George. The thought never popped into my mind to go any place locally. It was always go work with George, go work with George, go work with George. George lives 1,200 miles from my house.
Yeah. Whew.
So, and I was driving back and forth, all the time doing the research for 2 years. But that was Kate nudging us along because she saw a need for me and George to get together to help Lindsay to get the message out. And to me, that's a perfect example of how powerful, again, not manipulating, but how powerful the nudging was.
Yeah, now let me add to that. It was necessary for Dan to physically be here for him to identify and have it known that, say, 1,000 years ago, he lived in this village on this piece of property. We'll be researching that for the upcoming book. There was a lot of Dan involvement in this geographic area, so I think that was also part of it.
And Dan, what was that first meeting like with the 3 of you? I mean, what are the first couple of questions you asked to break the ice?
No, it was just a conversation, a normal conversation. George introduced us, and we just started talking, and eventually brought out the pendulum, and we started doing sessions.
Yeah, you've seen the clip with Lindsay, and she's very affable. I mean, she was ready to go.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So that episode is Haunted, which is my favorite, actually, paranormal series. I like A Haunting too, but that's my favorite one on Netflix. And I thought season 1 was the best. And I literally am not exaggerating, George, when I said I've seen it 4 or 5 times. When I'm bored and I can't find something to watch, I'll go back and watch them because they're 20, 25 minutes. And the production value was phenomenal. And I mean, the way they did the money shot when she's in college and even when she's younger. How did you feel? I mean, you were obviously in there and having reactions, but when you saw it for the first time, were you happy with that episode?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and her cousin, I thought was always asking the questions the audience had in their mind or had the reaction, and you were very kind of the voice of reason and credibility. It was really well done. And I really recommend people check out Haunted season 1, episode 5. George is in it, as well as Lindsay, of course. But that kind of scratches the surface, and it made me kind of fearful for her. I thought, one, she couldn't have children. Did she ever tell her husband, Tim? I imagine she's gone public, so she's told him about it, correct?
Oh, yeah.
And is she coping better? Is she a lot of those season 1 episodes are almost like, oh, I'll just never get away from this. And it's almost like a really negative kind of ending. But how is she faring today?
Okay. We talked with Lindsay recently. to specifically respond to that question. And Lindsay's doing fine. As a course of the investigation, we learned in speaking with, if you will, the spirit who was pretty much managing her contact, what was the purpose here. And what we learned is that 6,000 years ago, that was the time frame that was given, Lindsay and this other spirit, we call him ET for fun, they were in a different plane. And because Lindsay has the ability to do the earth thing and reincarnate, that was an element of a process. I won't say experiment, but it was a long-term process that she was asked to participate in that would utilize her ability to reincarnate. And once Lindsay learned that, her response was, oh, okay, well, if I agreed to do it, then all right, let's continue. And then she had a request, but if we're going to continue this, no more pain, no more aches, none of that stuff. And there were a few episodes following that where she reported, there were some associations, but there was absolutely no discomfort to her.
Did she ever, I mean, it seemed like, correct me if I'm wrong, in the episode, she was unable to conceive children and really wanted to do that. To me, that would make a lot of people very angry. Did she ever resolve that? And does she have a peaceful connection with the aliens now? Or what is her relationship with her abductors?
I kind of asked her if there's been any recent activities, and she said, no, it's pretty much over.
Really? So no more. And so when you work with her, is it more about going into her past life and asking questions, or what's your relationship kind of beyond that episode that we saw?
Relationship are just good friends with like interest, and gosh, we want to write a book about your story. Okay, I want to tell my story. So that's kind of how that goes. Dan is a certified hypnotherapist. So if Lindsay wanted to pursue that avenue, it would have been available. As it was, she didn't particularly care to go that route.
I thought I had heard on another podcast, that she had wanted to talk to herself in a past life. Did that happen? Did you guys do that with the dowsing, the pendulum dowsing?
Yeah, that's what we mentioned earlier, where me, Dan, and Lindsay got together with the pendulum, and Lindsay was able to talk to the spirit of her previous incarnation, Sally Murph Woodward. So you got physical Lindsay using the pendulum to talk to spiritual Lindsay.
That just has to be a mind-blowing experience.
It was an eye-opener.
And is that how she found out that her father and her mother or her family chose to reincarnate? Is that when that came out?
Through the process, it wasn't that particular session necessarily, but it was evident that her sister and her father in particular were maintaining these same relationships.
And, George or Dan, we can answer, who's Morlock? How does that, is that kind of an entity that Lindsay saw earlier in her life and almost like a friend, an entity, you give it a name? Or what's the story behind Morlock?
That is the earliest recollection Lindsay has. And the situation there, when she was very young, maybe 2, maybe 3, her father at that time, he was a restaurateur, and he had taken a former train station and turned it into a nice upscale restaurant. And during the day, he and his wife are, of course, downstairs running the restaurant, and young Lindsay's upstairs in her room. One day, as Lindsay recalls, and this is a Lindsay memory, it's not her regurgitating what she's been told, this is an actual memory. She was looking through the window, and it was a nice, bright, sunny day, and she wanted to go outside and play. And a little bit later, some folks were walking into the restaurant, and they look up on the second floor balcony and notice this little child wandering around. So they, of course, notified her father, and of course, they rush upstairs, and the window is open, and they bring her back inside, close the window. Now, these are heavy double-hung windows. Dan and I played with. I mean, there's no way a child's going to budge those windows. But she was asked, and there was nobody else upstairs who could open them. She was asked, who opened the window for you? Oh, well, that was my friend Morlock. And we asked Lindsay, was any reason you chose the word Morlock? And no, she'd had no clue. That's just what popped into her mind. to give a name to this spirit friend that she would often play with. So that's where Morlock came from.
And in the episode, I thought she said that the aliens always came in 3 or whatever. So Morlock wasn't perceived as an alien. Is that correct? Or who was Morlock? Just besides just an entity friend?
A spirit.
Spirit. Okay. So not an alien. Okay. All right. And, Dan, I'm going to kick it back to you. I think you included the Lindsay Higgins experience in your most recent Pendulum book, Pendulum 3, Paranormal Pendulum 3, The Abduction of Lindsay Higgins.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you set up that book and how it's different from the prior ones and what people can expect when they buy it?
Well, it's different only in the sense that the technique is exactly the same. Pendulum dowsing techniques are identical. The difference is George and I, after I got George's call, we were exploring the UFO phenomenon, and and the Lindsay Higgins story, and that's that's the real difference. It's just a different subject matter. But one of the surprising things, we've been researching spirits, so we were switching over to UFOs, and all of a sudden we were back to spirits again, guiding us to the UFO book.
Wow.
It's an interesting combination of how the spirit world and the UFO world and our physical world are all interconnected.
And I've never heard of anyone besides you using, not that I met everybody, but using pendulum dowsing for the purpose that you ultimately do with UFOs. Do you know anyone else like you out there, Dan?
I haven't come across it, and it was kind of surprising to me, but somebody brought that up a couple of years ago that they had never heard about using dowsing in the UFO research. And I'd never gave it much thought. It just seemed like a natural extension of what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's easy to do. The only hard part is you've got to make sure that you're not getting the answer that you want, keeping your mind clear so that you get the answer you're supposed to have.
I would guess like in controlled remote viewing, it's how the request or question or desired response is given to you, right? And is that you and George that both do it, or is it mostly just you when you're doing it?
No, George has turned into a pretty good pendulum dowser. The questions are essential. I can give you an example from my days looking for missing persons.
Yeah.
How framing the question is so incredibly important. But I would do the obvious question. I'd get a case in, little blonde, blue-eyed Sandy June is missing. And I would ask the obvious question, is little Sandy June alive? And I would get a yes. Then I would do my work, 4 or 5 hours later, file my report. And then we would find out that little Sandy June was deceased. And over and over and over and over again, I would get accurate responses in terms of where the abduction took place, or where the murder took place, or where the body was, or where the remains was. But consistently, I was wrong on the fact that I kept getting, the missing person is alive when, they had been deceased for a long time. And it finally hit me. Oh, you dummy. Life goes on. I believe in life after death.
Yeah, that could.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
So I was getting a correct answer. Yes, little Sandy June is alive, but she's up there in heaven, playing with the other kids. Her physical body is what is deceased. So from then on, the question became, is little Sandy June physically alive on this plane? Makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that could be quite upsetting to the parents if they think she's alive.
Yeah.
Pretty tough thing. What about finding the person that actually abducted the child? Did you ever use it for that and have any success with that?
Yeah, I've had some success. Me. When I say me, it's me and a lot of other psychics working together. We've had our successes. I've written a book called "They Are Not Yet Lost." They are not yet lost, and it's all about the psychic detecting cases. Many of the cases that I worked.
How long did it take for the police to be like, okay, yeah, we're not going to worry about any stigma about calling Dan in? How long did it take to build a reputation with them?
No, it depends on what you mean by the police. If you're talking about street cops,
yep.
The ones that I've run into, and when I say street cops, I mean detectives, street cops,
yep.
Cops on the street. The Mounties are really into it.
Really?
Street cops, they deal with cop instinct. When you put it on that level, you can run into a policeman who will say, I don't believe in psychic ability. And you ask him, do you believe in cop instinct? Oh, yeah. Well, duh. So, the the beat cops, they are far more open to it.
All right. Before we go on to the sky star people, I want to ask you and George. Start with you, Dan. Have you ever had any experiences where you saw a UFO or a ghost or anything like that personally?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not a medium, so my contact with the spirit world is primarily through the pendulum. I've had a couple of examples over the years where I've actually seen a spirit. Very rare. More times than not, I've felt a presence, but my primary contact with the spirit world is through the pendulum. And as far as UFOs, I mean, Lord, step out in the front yard at night, they're there.
Wow, interesting. In Arizona, especially, yeah. And George, what about you?
Probably the most profound experience I've had in this field. We had to put a chapter in the book, Paranormal Pendulum 3, about this experience. And real succinct what it was there was a point in the research where everything was just clicking. I mean, the right people were coming together, the right questions were being asked. There was just a lot of momentum, and it was rocking and rolling. And my skeptical self stepped back and said, well, wait a minute. This is almost too good. Is it possible that Dan and I are somehow subliminally influencing this information? And so I went on to sleep, but get up the next morning, 7 a.m., go open up the windows or open up the blinds in the living room, and hello, hovering above my neighbor's house across the street is about a 30-foot orange sphere.
Oh,
And I'm just looking at that sucker. It's not moving. It's the circumference had some a painter, like when a painter feathers, it's not a hard circumference. It's kind of feathery.
yeah.
A street light below it at that time was using those colored lamps to illuminate the neighborhood. And that orange was a little darker than the craft. But I just stared at that sucker. I mean, examined it upside, downside, inside, outside. And then eventually went and fed the cat, made myself a cup of coffee, came back through the living room, looked out the window, and of course it's gone. And that's when it hit me. It was evident that what I had experienced, one, yes, there was the answer to my questioning, are Dan and I influencing this? No, this is a real event. It's really happening, and you're doing good work. And it dawned on me that they also gave me a little subtle taste of how they communicate with people. The reason I came to that conclusion is, if you ask anybody, George, you're seeing this big thing in the sky, what's the first thing you're going to do? Well, hell, go outside and look at it directly, or grab the camera and get a picture of it. Neither of those came anywhere near my mind. I had no idea to leave it, go outside and look at it, no idea to take a picture of it, never entered my mind. The impression I was left with, here we are, you can examine us to your heart's content, but don't get too close and you can't have a picture.
Was it what you expected, George? Was anything different, like how you felt or what you saw?
Nothing was expected. I just woke up, okay, go to the kitchen, make some coffee, and open a window, and there it is. What the hell?
Yeah, but I know how people talk about UFOs, and you've seen, dramatizations, of course. Was it like, it's somewhat accurate from what I've seen before, or was it just something totally different?
Let me answer it in this manner. In many of the instances, way back when Dan and I would go interview someone who had some sort of encounter and they just wanted to get it off their chest, I was making notes of how many of them interpreted it as personal, that there was some personal connection with this experience. And I thought that was a little, okay, I guess. But after my event, I clearly understood what they meant. That was a personal event for me, because it was just before dawn. There wasn't any traffic in the neighborhood, and I suspect if there was traffic, nobody would have noticed it. So it was, it was targeted toward me to adjust my way of thinking about this project. That we're doing fine, keep it up.
Wow. And do you think of aliens and abductions as they're horrifying and scary, of course, but as ultimately as being beneficial or needed and not such a negative thing? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my thoughts, first off, I don't like the word abduction. After what we've learned from Lindsay, I'm more disposed to look upon whatever's occurring with the individual as part of a protracted situation, that it's not a random act like a kidnapping or an abduction. That's why I don't like that word.
Reunion, or is it a reunion or visitation? Or what would you...
probably the best word.
Yeah. So you see it as a positive thing. Do you also agree, Dan, I'd ask you as well, I've heard people talk about the different types of aliens. Do you believe that there are many aliens and that most are good and there are some that are evil, just like people, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think when you say alien, there are different, for lack of a better term, species coming from different locations in the physical world. I also think there are portals into other dimensions, other areas, perhaps other, for lack of a better term, other dimensions we can't even conceive of. As a general rule, all positive. I'm sure there are a few examples of negative experiences from what I've read. I've never had one. In fact, all the work George and I have done with the spirit world and with the UFOs, we've never had a negative experience, not even close.
What, you never had like a demonic, entity or
no, we don't go,
entity?
and we don't go looking for it, and we don't misinterpret.
Maybe that's the key.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, no, seriously. I watched one of these shows on TV, and they were driving up to a quote haunted house, and they stopped outside, and they were saying, "Boy, this is demonic. We're going to have a demonic experience tonight, boy." What the hell? You haven't even started yet. So George and I, we go in expecting a good experience, and I call it the law of attraction. But we have good experiences, and when we have something that's odd, like a strange rapping or somebody's touched you on the back of the head or something, we interpret that as a positive experience, and it because it is.
Huh. It's so funny. I watch shows like The Dead Files, and look, I like a lot of different paranormal shows. And it's always like a ghost and a demon and a trapped entity and an Indian curse. Just like 5 or 6 things wrapped up, and they have to move. I always am surprised.
Well, think about it. Do you run into a demon every time you go out?
God, I hope not. Otherwise, I'm not like acknowledging them. It's. But I.
Well, yeah, I can guarantee you, if George and I ever walked into a place and we heard "get out," we would get out. Yeah, we would be doing our Michael Jackson moonwalk
in reverse. Talking about aliens and stuff, that's kind of a nice segue to your next book, Sky or Star People. You want to talk about, and you guys can both, hand off as you feel appropriate, how that started and where it is and when we can expect to read it?
Yeah, okay, I'll start off because, we were talking, and, it's common in cultures all around the world that knowledge came down from beings from the sky. That's universal. And we were talking one day, and I think we were at someplace in Louisiana. Might have been Poverty Point, but we said, these sky people sounds an awful lot like what we're calling aliens and ETs. Why don't we experiment with the pendulum and see what we can come up with? And so we kind of divided our investigation. George is back over in the mound building culture, the great high civilizations that built the mountains out of dirt. I'm over here in the cliff dwelling area of the great the cliff dwellings and the great pueblos.
Yep.
And we're both conducting similar investigations in 2 entirely different cultures and 2 entirely different things about the sky people. And we keep encountering, yes, there were people who came down from the sky and who did visit with our people.
So George, you do dowsing too then, correct? You've met Dan and you've picked up that kind of the talent, and you do it yourself as well?
Sure.
Yeah, George is a good dowser.
You guys should there should be a documentary on you guys, because it's such a unique take on it, and it would be, there's nothing, with all the saturation we have of the paranormal, there's been nothing like this, I don't think, that I've seen on a shock doc or whatever. I think it's...
People often have that response when they see
it. You really should.
Never seen anything like this before.
No, and I'm 4 years into this and watched a ton of shows, and this is even when I read your bios, it still didn't hit me till having this conversation that you're the only one, Dan, I've ever heard that did this, and the success you've had. So let's talk about Sky Star people and how do you do your research? So you're doing your research with the both in your different locations with the pendulum dowsing. How do you accumulate it, and how's it turning into a book?
Yeah, George, tell me about Poverty Point. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I guess that's about the only good place to start.
I've heard of Providence Point, yeah.
Yeah, Poverty Point is northeast Louisiana. It's a World Heritage Site. It is where archaeologists are indicating that there was a major civilization on this land. They're saying about 3000 BC. So we're talking way back when. And I was at Poverty Point. It's a fabulous place. Its primary feature is a 75-foot tall mound that they speculate was originally in the shape of a bird. But so I was walking around the mound and just picking up just all sorts of energies. And finally I went down and found a picnic table, sat down, and said, well, let me take the pendulum. So I took out the pendulum and, is there anyone here? Yes. Whoa. By chance, am I speaking with someone who was here at Poverty Point, say, 4,000 years ago? Yes. And just by yes and no questions, just kind of narrowing it down that I was speaking with a male who was alive at that location roughly 4,000 years ago. Ruled out that he was a farmer, ruled out that he was a fisherman, ruled out that he was a warrior type. Did rule in that he had some special talents that set him apart. And that's when I asked, well, was your role there what we would consider a medicine man or a shaman? And that pendulum just started going crazy with the big swing. So the first contact was with this individual who was the shaman for that village at that time frame. Just for expedience sake, asked if I could reference him as Jacques Poe, just to give a name for that particular entity. And he said, sure, fine. So Jacques Poe is, whenever we have a session and we ask for Jacques Poe, he's there and we get some answers that he has knowledge of. So that's kind of how that got started. So we would visit other settlements through various time frames in, say, North Louisiana, Shreveport, Bossier area, and ask the similar questions, and we would come up with, yes, there was a village here 500 years ago. Yes, this person was here. Yes, they had interactions with Sky people. Jacques Poe at Poverty Point, he was the primary contact with the Sky people. Went into detail with that. Now, he went on board the crafts. Several of the villagers went on board the craft.
So they had disclosure back then. It's like, we're this modern evolved society and we can't have disclosure, but it seemed like they're getting on the craft, they're learning stuff, they're learning how to be attuned better to nature. I mean, what went wrong?
Well, let me extend this just a bit, because Dan visited a site briefly in western Mississippi on one of his treks through the area, and he made contact. I had a group of folks, and we were having a session. We decided let's learn about this Mississippi site, and we made contact with the spirit who was the chief of that particular village. And what the chief described about the relationship with the Sky people is he would go up with the Sky people. And in this particular session, we had some psychics with us augmenting the pendulum, and he was presenting to the psychics the interior of the craft. We got just a tour of the craft. That was not what you would expect. It was the doggonedest thing. But then at that same session, another medium checked in by phone and who had an experience inside a craft. And we were able to record her description, and it was almost identical to what we had just learned from the chief in the Mississippi village.
So we're going to leave that as a tease. And when do you think the book will be done? Is it going to be this year, do you think, or next year?
We're still finding out ourselves.
Do it before the election, before all hell breaks loose. That'll be good.
Yeah, this year.
Yeah, probably end of the year.
Well, that's excellent, gentlemen. I want to close by each of you telling us where your website is and where they can buy your books, and if there's any books that we didn't talk about that you'd like to point them to. So, Dan, I know you've written like a ton of books, so let's start with you first.
Yeah, all of my books are available in the ebook, paperback. A lot of them are available in hardback through Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Wherever you order your books, you can order my book. And I've got, like I said, paranormal nonfiction. I've got fiction in multiple genres. You can check out my website at www.danbaldwin.com. And you can also check out www.fournightspress.com. That's Four Nights, KNIGHTS, fournightspress.com. And my email address is on those sites if you wanted to contact me direct.
Oh, that's great. And George, do you have a website or any books besides the one that you gentlemen are working on together you want to promote?
Yeah, and they'll be listed at my website, which is www.georgesewell, Sewell. Be sure you get that middle initial E, otherwise you'll go visit some guy in New York City.
I noticed that when I got the show prep.
Yeah, and then my book's listed there as well as some other stuff. Right now, I'm posting some very interesting photographs from the past couple of years. It would not be uncommon for me just to take a picture of the sky or wherever, and the picture would reveal a glowing orb. It could reveal what apparently is a craft of some sort. Whatever it is not seen visually, but for some reason the camera will pick it up. So I'm putting a few of those on that particular website because they're, what the heck is it?
Yeah, we should also, mention, just a reminder, on Netflix, which half the universe has, Haunted, season 1, which is, I think it's the best season by far. There's 3, I keep waiting for a 4th season to come out, but it's season 1, episode 5, and George is in it. Are you gentlemen attending any Paracons in the future, or do you tend to do that, or are you going to be in any upcoming series or shows that you can talk about?
Nothing we can chat about at the moment.
Okay, that's fair. Well, Dan, George, thank you so much for your time today. I've loved this conversation. I've learned a lot, and I look forward to following you and finding out more. And I really think someone should do a documentary on you. So hopefully someone's listening and they do that. Hopefully you get that phone call and it's for you and George. It's for George. It's for you and Dan. It's not for Lindsay, but this one's for you. So thank you, gentlemen, both for your time. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. We enjoyed it.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.